Marcus Rivera stepped off the crowded subway train at Grand Central Station, his weathered hands gripping a worn leather briefcase. The evening rush hour chaos surrounded him, but his trained eyes automatically scanned the crowd for potential threats. 25 years in military intelligence had made paranoia a survival skill, not a weakness. At 62, Marcus looked like any other retired government worker heading home after a long day. His gray hair was neatly trimmed, his dark suit unremarkable, but beneath the ordinary exterior lived a man who had spent decades in the shadows, orchestrating operations that never made headlines and saving lives whose names he would never know. The coffee shop on Fifth Avenue had been his regular spot for 3 months now. Every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 6:15, he ordered a black coffee and sat at the corner table with a clear view of both entrances. To anyone watching, he appeared to be reading the newspaper. In reality, he was monitoring a dead drop location across the street. The operation had started as routine surveillance. Intelligence suggested that a foreign cell was planning something significant in the city, but the details remained frustratingly vague. Marcus had been pulled out of semi-retirement because of his expertise in counterintelligence. His handler, Director Sarah Chen, had been direct about the assignment's importance. "We need someone invisible," she had explained during their meeting at a secure facility in Virginia. "Someone who can blend in completely while keeping eyes on this location. The targets are sophisticated and they'll spot our younger operatives immediately." Marcus had accepted without hesitation. Despite officially retiring 2 years earlier, he missed the work. His small apartment in Queens felt too quiet after decades of constant motion and purpose. His ex-wife had remarried and moved to California. His daughter called once a month, their conversations polite but distant. The work gave him meaning when everything else felt hollow. The Target building housed a small import business on the ground floor, with residential apartments above. Intelligence indicated that someone in the building was coordinating with overseas contacts, passing information that could compromise national security. Marcus's job was simple: observe, document, and report any unusual activity. For weeks he had watched the same patterns. The shop owner, an elderly Iranian man named Hassan, opened at 9 and closed at 6. Various residents came and went from the apartments upstairs. A young woman with dark hair often left early in the morning and returned late at night. An older couple took evening walks together. A man in his 30s who worked irregular hours and always seemed nervous. Nothing had triggered Marcus's instincts until last Tuesday. He had been reviewing his notes when he noticed a subtle pattern in the foot traffic. 3 different people had entered the building within a 2-hour window, each staying exactly 12 minutes. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. That evening, Marcus had activated an old protocol. Using a specialized radio frequency that only former special operations personnel would recognize, he transmitted a coded signal. It was a risk, but something about the pattern felt wrong. The signal was designed to identify other operatives who might be working the same area, without official coordination. He never expected a response. The answering signal came through clearly, using the exact counterphrase that only someone with his level of clearance would know. But the transmission style felt different, more refined somehow. Marcus had worked with dozens of operatives over the years, and each had their own signature in how they handled communications. This one was unfamiliar. Now, as he settled into his usual table at the coffee shop, Marcus felt the familiar weight of uncertainty that came with unexpected variables. Someone else was watching the same building, someone with the same level of security clearance he possessed. But why hadn't Director Chen mentioned another operative in the area? The evening light cast long shadows across the street as Marcus opened his newspaper. His reflection in the window showed a man who had learned to hide his thoughts behind a mask of casual indifference. But inside, his mind was racing through possibilities. The most likely explanation was operational compartmentalization. Different agencies sometimes worked parallel investigations without sharing information, even when their targets overlapped. It was inefficient and occasionally dangerous, but it was standard procedure when dealing with sensitive intelligence. The second possibility was more troubling. Someone was running an unauthorized operation in his sector. Rogue operatives were rare but not unknown, especially among those who had been forced into retirement before they were ready. The psychological toll of constantly shifting between normal life and covert operations sometimes created individuals who couldn't fully disengage from the work. The third possibility made Marcus's coffee taste bitter. He could be walking into a trap. His years of experience had made him valuable, but they had also made him a target. Foreign intelligence services maintained detailed files on American operatives, especially those who had been involved in significant operations. A sophisticated enemy could potentially replicate communication protocols to draw him into a compromised situation. As 6:30 approached, Marcus made his decision. He would maintain his surveillance schedule but change his communication pattern. If another operative was genuinely working the area, they would need to prove their identity through channels that couldn't be easily compromised. The newspaper rustled as he turned to the sports section, his eyes never leaving the building across the street. In the reflection of the coffee shop window, he could see other customers behind him. An elderly woman knitting in the corner booth. A young man typing on a laptop near the counter. A woman in her 40s reading a book at the table by the wall. Nothing seemed out of place, but Marcus had learned long ago that the most dangerous threats often appeared completely ordinary. As he finished his coffee and prepared to leave, he made mental notes of every face in the shop. Tomorrow he would see if any of them returned. The walk back to the subway took him through 3 different routes, each one allowing him to check for surveillance. Old habits died hard, and in his line of work, paranoia had kept him alive through situations that had killed less cautious men. But as he descended into the subway station, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully ordered world was about to become significantly more complicated. The mysterious operative who had answered his signal represented a new variable in an equation he thought he understood. And in his experience, unknown variables were usually dangerous. Elena Vasquez had been watching Marcus Rivera for 2 weeks before he sent the signal. From her position in the bookstore across from the coffee shop, she had a perfect view of both his table and the target building. Her cover was simple but effective. A freelance translator who worked irregular hours and spent long periods reading in public places. At 38, Elena possessed the kind of unremarkable beauty that made her nearly invisible in crowds. Average height, brown hair that she styled differently each week, clothes that were neither fashionable nor dowdy. She had cultivated this appearance over 15 years of covert operations, learning that the best disguise was being completely forgettable. Her real name wasn't Elena Vasquez. That identity had been carefully constructed by the CIA's Technical Services Division when she was recruited straight out of graduate school. She had been studying international relations at Georgetown when a professor recommended her for a special government program. The professor, she later learned, had been a talent spotter for the agency. The young woman who had entered CIA training at 23 no longer existed in any official capacity. Birth certificates, school records, and family connections had all been quietly altered or erased. Elena Vasquez existed only as long as the mission required, and when it ended, she would disappear just as completely as her predecessors had. But unlike her previous assignments, this operation felt personal. The target building held more than just another cell of foreign operatives. Intelligence suggested that the network operating from that location had been responsible for the death of her former partner, Agent David Kim, 6 months earlier in Prague. David had been tracking the same organization when his cover was blown. The official report listed his death as a random street crime, but Elena knew better. The timing was too convenient, the circumstances too clean. Someone had identified him as a threat and eliminated him before he could complete his investigation. Elena's current assignment had come directly from Deputy Director James Morrison, one of the few people who knew her real identity. The briefing had been held in a safe house in Arlington, with just the 2 of them present. "This is off the books," Morrison had explained, sliding a thick file across the table. "No official oversight, no backup unless you specifically request it. The network David was tracking has surfaced in New York, and we think they're planning something significant." The file contained photographs, surveillance reports, and intercepted communications that painted a picture of a sophisticated operation. The group appeared to be using the import business as a front for moving both money and personnel. But their ultimate objective remained unclear. "Why me?" Helena had asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Because you knew David's methods better than anyone else, and because you have the most reason to want these people stopped." Elena had accepted the assignment knowing it was probably a trap. Morrison was known for using personal motivation to push operatives beyond normal safety protocols. But the chance to find David's killers was worth the risk. Her surveillance had quickly revealed the same patterns that Marcus was undoubtedly noticing. The building had too much foot traffic for a simple import business. People entered and left at regular intervals, staying just long enough to pass information or receive instructions. The operation was professional and careful, but not perfect. Elena's advantage was her linguistic skills. She spoke fluent Farsi, Arabic, and Russian, allowing her to identify the background of various visitors based on overheard conversations. The diversity of languages suggested an international network with connections across multiple regions. The breakthrough came when she identified one of the regular visitors as Dmitry Volkov, a Russian intelligence operative she had encountered during a previous assignment in Berlin. Volkov was known for his work in coordinating cyber attacks against Western infrastructure. His presence in New York suggested the network was planning something far more serious than simple information gathering. That was when Elena first noticed Marcus Rivera. His tradecraft was excellent but dated. He used surveillance techniques that had been standard 20 years ago, but had since been refined. His communication equipment was military grade but from an older generation. Everything about his approach suggested extensive experience but recent inactivity. Elena ran his image through facial recognition software using her secure laptop. The results confirmed her suspicions. Marcus Rivera, retired Army intelligence, 25 years of service in various classified operations. His file was heavily redacted, but the visible portions indicated involvement in counterterrorism operations across 3 continents. The question was whether Marcus was working with official sanction or conducting his own unauthorized investigation. Elena's experience had taught her to trust carefully but verify completely. Too many operations had been compromised by assuming friendly intentions from unidentified parties. When Marcus transmitted his identification signal, Elena faced a critical decision. Standard protocol required her to report the contact to Morrison and await instructions, but standard protocol had gotten David killed, and Elena was tired of following rules that seemed designed to protect bureaucrats rather than operatives in the field. She decided to answer. The counterphrase came automatically, drilled into her memory during countless training exercises, but even as she transmitted the response, Elena was planning her next moves. If Marcus was legitimate, he could provide valuable backup for an operation that was becoming increasingly dangerous. If he was compromised, she needed to identify the threat before it could expose her. Either way, she would need to make contact. Elena closed her book and gathered her belongings, moving with the unhurried pace of someone finishing their daily routine. The bookstore clerk barely looked up as she left, exactly as she had planned. Anonymous customers were quickly forgotten, but memorable ones were remembered long after they became dangerous. The walk to her apartment took her through a carefully planned route that allowed for counter-surveillance. Elena had chosen the location specifically for its multiple exit routes and clear sight lines. The building was old but well-maintained, with a landlord who asked few questions and accepted cash payments without complaint. Her apartment was spartanly furnished but contained everything necessary for extended surveillance operations: high-powered binoculars, encrypted communication equipment, a selection of identification documents for different cover identities, and weapons that could be quickly concealed or disposed of. Elena activated her secure satellite communication system and composed a brief message to Morrison. She reported the presence of another operative but didn't mention her plan to make contact. Some risks were better taken without official knowledge, especially when official channels might be compromised. The message sent, Elena began preparing for tomorrow's operation. Making contact with Marcus would require careful planning. Too direct an approach might spook him if he was legitimate, or trigger an attack if he wasn't. Too subtle an approach might be missed entirely or misinterpreted as a threat. She decided on a middle course. Elena would position herself where Marcus could see her during his next surveillance shift, then use subtle signals to indicate her interest in communication. If he was as experienced as his file suggested, he would recognize the approach and respond appropriately. As Elena cleaned and checked her sidearm, she thought about David and the phone call she had received the night he died. His voice had been strained but urgent as he described what he had discovered in Prague. "They're not just passing information," he had said. They're coordinating something big, something that could change everything. I'm close to finding out what, but I think they're getting suspicious. If something happens to me, promise you'll finish this, Elena had promised, never imagining that 6 months later, she would be sitting in a New York apartment, preparing to trust a stranger with both their lives. But David's death had taught her that playing it safe wasn't always the safest option. Sometimes the only way forward was to take calculated risks with dangerous people, hoping that shared enemies could create temporary allies. Tomorrow, she would find out if Marcus Rivera was the ally she needed, or another threat she would have to eliminate. The next morning brought unexpected complications. Marcus arrived at his usual surveillance position to find the coffee shop temporarily closed for health inspection. The handwritten sign taped to the window looked legitimate, but his instincts immediately flagged it as suspicious. Health inspections were typically scheduled weeks in advance, not announced with hastily written notices. Marcus walked past the shop twice, noting details that most people would miss. The inspection van parked outside bore the correct city markings, but the license plate was too clean for a working vehicle. The inspector visible through. The window wore the right uniform but moved, with military precision rather than the casual efficiency of a civil servant. Someone was sending a message. The question was whether the message came from Elena, the mysterious operative who had answered his signal, or from the targets they were both monitoring. Either way, Marcus needed to adapt quickly. 25 years of field work had taught him that rigid plans were death traps waiting to spring. He selected an alternate position in the small park across the street, settling onto a bench with a clear view of both the coffee shop and the target building. The morning was crisp with enough foot traffic to provide cover, but not so much that he couldn't track individual movements. Within an hour, Marcus confirmed his suspicions about the coffee shop. The inspection was real, but had been requested anonymously through official channels just 24 hours earlier. Someone with access to city systems had orchestrated the closure, timing it precisely to disrupt his surveillance routine. The sophistication of the move impressed him. Most operatives would have chosen more direct methods to flush out surveillance. This approach showed both patience and careful planning, suggesting he was dealing with someone who understood the long game of intelligence work. At 10:30, Marcus spotted her. Elena Vasquez emerged from the bookstore across the street, moving with the unhurried pace of someone running routine errands. But her path took her directly past Marcus's new position, and she carried herself with the awareness that marked someone accustomed to being watched. She was younger than he had expected, probably in her late 30s, with the kind of understated appearance that suggested professional training in blending with crowds. Her clothes were appropriate for the neighborhood but revealed nothing about her background or intentions. Elena approached the closed coffee shop, reading the inspection notice with apparent disappointment. Then she turned toward the park, scanning for alternative seating. Her gaze swept past Marcus without apparent recognition, but he caught the subtle pause that indicated she had cataloged his presence. She selected a bench approximately 30 feet from his position, close enough for communication, but far enough to avoid appearing intentional. Elena opened a paperback novel and settled into reading, positioning herself to maintain visual contact with the target building. For 20 minutes, they sat in parallel surveillance, each monitoring the same location while carefully ignoring each other. Marcus found himself grudgingly impressed by Elena's tradecraft. She maintained perfect cover while subtly indicating her willingness to communicate. The opening came when a jogger accidentally knocked over Elena's coffee cup, spilling the contents across the ground. Marcus immediately moved to help, offering tissues from his jacket pocket while the jogger apologized and continued running. "Thank you," Elena said, accepting the tissues. Her voice carried a slight accent that Marcus couldn't immediately place. "I should have been more careful." "These things happen," Marcus replied, settling back onto his bench. To anyone watching, they had shared a brief, forgettable interaction between strangers, but Elena's next words were spoken quietly, meant only for his ears. "The coffee shop closure was my doing. We need to talk, but not here." Marcus felt a familiar adrenaline spike. After weeks of routine surveillance, the operation was finally moving into active phase. Elena's admission about the coffee shop demonstrated both capability and willingness to take initiative. It also suggested she had been watching him long enough to understand his patterns. "When and where?" he asked, still maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. There's a small diner on Roosevelt Avenue in Queens. Mickey's place tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon. Come alone and make sure you're not followed. Elena gathered her belongings and left without looking back, disappearing into the crowd with practiced ease. Marcus remained on the bench for another hour, maintaining his surveillance while processing this new development. The choice of meeting location told him several things about Elena. Queens was far from Manhattan's intelligence community, reducing the chance of accidental encounters with other operatives. Mickey's place was a neighborhood institution, busy enough to provide cover but local enough that strangers would be noticed. The timing allowed both of them to conduct counter-surveillance before the meeting, but Marcus's analysis was interrupted by activity at the target building. Dmitry Volkov, the Russian operative Elena had identified, emerged from the import shop looking agitated. He spoke briefly with Hassan, the shop owner, before walking quickly toward the subway station. Marcus made a split-second decision to follow. Volkov's sudden departure could indicate that their surveillance had been detected, or it might represent an opportunity to gather intelligence about the network's next move. The tale required all of Marcus's experience. Volkov was a professional who understood counter-surveillance techniques. He changed directions randomly, used reflection in store windows to check for followers, and took a circuitous route that would expose anyone trying to track him. But Marcus had been doing this longer than Volkov had been alive. He maintained distance, used other pedestrians for cover, and employed observation techniques that the younger operative might not recognize. Volkov's destination was a small electronics store in a shopping center in Brooklyn. Marcus positioned himself at a coffee cart with a view of the store entrance and waited. 20 minutes later, Volkov emerged carrying a small package, his earlier agitation replaced by satisfaction. The return journey provided Marcus with additional intelligence. Volkov made 2 phone calls, both in Russian, both brief and coded. The second call seemed to confirm arrangements for an evening meeting. Marcus memorized the time references and code words, planning to analyze them later. By the time Volkov returned to Manhattan, Marcus had compiled enough information to justify the risks he had taken. The Russian was clearly coordinating with others, and the electronics purchase suggested technical preparation for an upcoming operation. But as Marcus rode the subway back to Queens that evening, his thoughts returned to Elena and tomorrow's meeting. Her demonstration of capability had been impressive, but it raised new questions about her identity and objectives. The coffee shop closure had required official channels or sophisticated hacking skills. Her surveillance techniques suggested extensive training. Her knowledge of his identity indicated access to classified databases. All of these capabilities pointed toward government employment, but which government remained unclear. Marcus spent the evening reviewing everything he knew about the operation, looking for connections he might have missed. The building surveillance, Volkov's activities, Elena's sudden appearance, all were pieces of a puzzle that was finally taking shape, but the complete picture remained frustratingly elusive. Marcus had learned to trust his instincts about people, and his initial assessment of Elena suggested she was legitimate. But legitimacy and trustworthiness weren't always the same thing. Tomorrow's meeting would provide answers to questions that had been building for weeks. Marcus prepared for multiple scenarios, from genuine cooperation to sophisticated entrapment. The weight of his concealed weapon provided comfort, but he hoped it wouldn't be necessary. As he settled into bed, Marcus reflected on how quickly his quiet retirement had become complicated. 3 months ago, his biggest concern had been paying rent on schedule. Now he was preparing to meet a mysterious operative who might hold the key to preventing a significant security threat. But despite the uncertainty, Marcus felt more alive than he had in years. The work gave him purpose, and purpose was something that had been missing from his carefully ordered civilian life. Whatever tomorrow brought, it would be better than the alternative of growing old quietly in Queens. Mickey's place occupied the corner of Roosevelt Avenue, like it had been there since the neighborhood was built. The red vinyl booth showed decades of use, and the smell of grilled onions permeated everything. Marcus arrived 20 minutes early, selecting a booth with clear sight lines to both entrances and the kitchen. The lunch crowd was typical for a Tuesday afternoon. Construction workers grabbing quick meals, elderly couples sharing coffee and conversation, A few teenagers cutting school to play video games in the corner. Marcus ordered coffee and a sandwich he didn't want, establishing his cover while running final security checks. Elena appeared exactly at 2 o'clock, entering through the main door and pausing to scan the restaurant. She had changed her appearance since yesterday. Her hair was pulled back severely and she wore glasses that altered the shape of her face. The transformation was subtle but effective, demonstrating the kind of attention to detail that came from extensive training. She slid into the booth across from Marcus without ceremony, positioning herself to watch the entrance he couldn't see. The waitress approached immediately and Elena ordered coffee with the easy familiarity of someone who had been here before. "You're either very good at this or very reckless," Elena said once they were alone. Her accent was less noticeable today, suggesting she had been moderating it consciously during their previous encounter. 25 years teaches you the difference," Marcus replied. "The question is which category you fall into." Elena smiled for the first time since he had seen her. The expression transformed her face, revealing intelligence and humor that her cover persona had concealed. "I prefer to think of it as calculated risk management, though my supervisors might disagree." "CIA?" Marcus asked directly. There was no point in elaborate games when both of them were clearly professionals. Among other letters, "Your Army intelligence retired 2 years ago from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Commendations for operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and several places that don't officially exist. Currently working surveillance on a consulting basis for Director Sarah Chen." The thoroughness of her intelligence impressed Marcus, but he kept his expression neutral. "You've done your homework. Now tell me why you closed my coffee shop." "Because we need to coordinate our efforts instead of accidentally compromising each other. The target building contains a cell that's been planning something significant for at least 6 months. Your surveillance is competent but incomplete. Mine has been more comprehensive but lacks the official backing you have." Elena pulled out a tablet and activated a privacy screen that would prevent anyone else from seeing the display. The device showed detailed surveillance photos, building schematics, and what appeared to be intercepted communications. "This is Dmitry Volkov," she said, displaying a high-resolution photograph of the Russian operative Marcus had followed yesterday. "FSB specializes in cyber warfare and infrastructure attacks. He's been coordinating with at least 6 other operatives, including 2 Americans who we believe are freelance contractors." The intelligence was far more detailed than anything Marcus had compiled during his weeks of observation. Elena had clearly been conducting active surveillance rather than the passive monitoring he had been assigned. "The import business is a front for money laundering and document forgery," Elena continued. "But the real operation is being coordinated from Apartment 4B. We've identified electronic equipment consistent with advanced hacking operations." Marcus studied the photographs, recognizing several faces from his own surveillance. "What's their target?" "That's what we're trying to determine." Intercepted communications reference something called Operation Blackout, scheduled for this weekend. The timing coincides with a major cybersecurity conference in the city, which could either be coincidental or deliberate. Elena swiped to another screen showing technical diagrams that meant nothing to Marcus but appeared sophisticated. Yesterday's electronics purchase was the final component for a device that could potentially disrupt cellular and internet communications across a significant area of Manhattan. The implications were staggering. A coordinated communications blackout during a major conference could enable everything from simple theft to terrorist attacks. Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came with actionable intelligence. "Why are you sharing this with me instead of coordinating through official channels?" he asked. Elena's expression darkened. "Because official channels got my partner killed 6 months ago in Prague. David Kim was tracking the same network when someone leaked his identity to the targets. He died 24 hours before he was supposed to report his findings." Marcus understood the personal motivation now. Elena wasn't just conducting surveillance. She was hunting the people who had killed someone important to her. Personal investment could be either an asset or a liability in intelligence work, depending on how well it was controlled. "I'm sorry for your loss," Marcus said, "but revenge operations usually end badly for everyone involved." "This isn't revenge. It's completion." David discovered that this network has connections to cyber attacks on infrastructure systems across Europe, water treatment plants, power grids, transportation systems, all targeted with precision that suggests inside knowledge of American security protocols. Elena showed him another screen displaying a map with dozens of red markers. These are facilities that have experienced unexplained technical problems over the past year. The pattern is subtle but consistent. Someone has been testing our vulnerabilities. Marcus studied the map, his experienced eye recognizing the strategic value of the marked locations. You think this weekend's operation is a test run for something larger? I think it's the culmination of a long-term intelligence gathering operation. The cybersecurity conference isn't just a target of opportunity. It's where many of the people responsible for protecting these facilities will be gathered in one location. The waitress refilled their coffee cups, providing a natural break in conversation. Marcus used the pause to process what Elena had revealed. The scope of the threat was far beyond what his handler had described, which raised questions about how much Director Chen actually knew. "What do you propose we do about it?" Marcus asked. "We combine our resources and capabilities. You have official backing that can provide rapid response when we identify the specific threat. I have intelligence that can guide that response effectively. Together we can prevent whatever they're planning and possibly roll up the entire network." Elena deactivated the tablet and leaned back in her seat. "The alternative is that we continue working parallel investigations until one of us stumbles into something that gets both of us killed." Marcus considered the proposal. Unofficial cooperation carried significant risks, especially if Elena's superiors were as compartmentalized as she suggested. But the intelligence she had shown was too valuable to ignore, and the threat was too significant to handle through normal bureaucratic channels. "I'll need to report this to my handler," Marcus said finally. "I expected that, but I'd prefer you wait until after tonight's surveillance. I've identified a meeting that should provide the final pieces of their operational plan. If we can gather that intelligence first, your handler will be more likely to support aggressive action." Elena slid a piece of paper across the table with an address written in neat handwriting. 8 o'clock. Come prepared for active surveillance, not passive observation. We'll be close enough to record conversations and identify all the participants. Marcus pocketed the address, already running tactical assessments. Active surveillance carried exponentially higher risks than the distant monitoring he had been conducting. But it also promised the kind of actionable intelligence that could prevent a significant attack. "One more thing," Elena said as she prepared to leave. "David's last message mentioned a mole in the American intelligence community. Someone with access to operational details and personnel files. Until we know who that is, we should assume that normal communication channels are compromised." She left cash on the table for her coffee and stood to go. "Tonight will tell us whether we can trust each other enough to stop whatever these people are planning. I hope we can, because the alternative is watching a major attack unfold while bureaucrats debate jurisdictional authority." Marcus remained in the booth for another 10 minutes after Elena left, ostensibly finishing his sandwich while actually processing everything she had revealed. The operation had evolved from routine surveillance to active counterintelligence in the span of one conversation. As he walked back toward the subway, Marcus felt the familiar pre-mission tension that had defined much of his military career. The stakes were high, the risks were significant, and success would depend on trusting someone he barely knew. But the alternative, allowing a potential terrorist attack to proceed while following proper channels, was unacceptable. Sometimes the right choice was also the dangerous choice. The warehouse district in Long Island City felt abandoned after dark. Streetlights illuminated empty loading docks and chain-link fences, creating pockets of harsh light separated by deep shadows. Marcus arrived at the address Elena had provided 30 minutes early, conducting a thorough reconnaissance of the area. The building was a converted manufacturing facility now housing several small businesses. According to the directory, the third floor contained offices for import companies, accounting firms, and what appeared to be shell corporations. Elena had been right about the choice of location. It was isolated enough for private meetings but legitimate enough to avoid unwanted attention. Marcus positioned himself in the doorway of a closed auto repair shop, with a clear view of the building's entrance. His equipment bag contained night vision optics, audio recording devices, and a camera capable of capturing clear images in low light. The gear was older than what current operatives used, but Marcus had maintained it carefully throughout his retirement. Elena appeared at exactly 7:45, approaching from the opposite direction. She had changed her appearance again, now wearing dark clothing and moving with the practiced stealth of someone accustomed to night operations. She carried a small backpack that undoubtedly contained similar surveillance equipment. They met at a predetermined rendezvous point behind a delivery truck parked across the street. Elena's face was painted with dark camouflage that made her nearly invisible in the shadows. "Target floor is 3. Office suite 312, she whispered. Building security is minimal. One guard who spends most of his time watching television in the lobby. Fire stairs are accessible from the alley entrance, which isn't monitored by cameras." Marcus nodded, impressed by her preparation. "How many participants are we expecting?" "At least 5, possibly more. Volkov arrived 20 minutes ago with 2 associates I haven't identified. Hassan from the import shop went up about 10 minutes after that. I'm expecting at least 1 more arrival before the meeting starts." As if summoned by her words, a black sedan pulled into the parking area. 2 men emerged, moving with military precision toward the building entrance. Marcus recognized one of them from his surveillance photos, an American he had tentatively identified as a former military contractor. "That's our cue," Elena said. "We go up the fire stairs to the 3rd floor and position ourselves outside Suite 3 and 12. The office layout should allow us to record most of the conversation through the ventilation system." The infiltration went smoothly. Elena's intelligence about building security proved accurate. The guard barely looked up from his television as they slipped past the lobby. The fire stairs were unlocked, and the 3rd floor hallway was dimly lit but empty. Suite 312 was located at the end of the corridor, with offices on either side that appeared to be unoccupied. Elena produced a small electronic device that detected sound transmission through walls, identifying the room where voices were gathered. Marcus set up his recording equipment while Elena established a visual monitoring position. The ventilation grate she had identified provided both audio access and a limited view of the meeting room through the return air duct. The conversation was already in progress when they began recording. Volkov was speaking in accented English, apparently briefing the group on technical details. Final equipment test was successful. Communication disruption radius will extend approximately 12 blocks from the primary device. Secondary devices will create interference patterns that prevent emergency response coordination. Marcus and Elena exchanged glances. The scope of the planned attack was even larger than they had anticipated. An American voice responded, one that Marcus didn't recognize, but Elena obviously did. Her reaction was immediate and alarming. She went completely rigid, her face draining of color. "Timing is critical," the American continued. "Conference registration begins at 8 a.m. tomorrow. By 9:30, most of the key personnel will be in the main auditorium for the opening presentation. That's when we activate." Elena leaned close to Marcus's ear, her whisper barely audible. "That's Deputy Director Morrison. He's my handler." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Elena's superior wasn't just compromised. He was actively coordinating the attack they had been trying to prevent. The mole she had mentioned wasn't some unknown bureaucrat. It was someone with direct access to her operation. Marcus grabbed Elena's arm as she started to move toward the ventilation grate. Her face showed barely controlled fury, and he recognized the dangerous moment when an operative's emotional response threatened to override tactical judgment. "Wait," he whispered urgently. "We need the complete plan before we act." Elena's training reasserted itself, but her hands were shaking as she resumed monitoring the meeting. Marcus increased the audio recording volume, capturing every word of the conversation that followed. Morrison was providing detailed intelligence about security arrangements for the cybersecurity conference, guard rotations, emergency protocols, evacuation procedures, information that would allow the attackers to maximize chaos while preventing effective response. "The communication blackout will last exactly 47 minutes, Morrison continued. "Long enough to complete the primary objective, but not so long that federal agencies can deploy hardened communication systems. During that window, we extract the target personnel and complete the data transfer." Marcus realized they weren't listening to plans for a terrorist attack. This was an intelligence extraction operation designed to capture key cybersecurity personnel and steal classified information about American infrastructure protection. The sophistication suggested state sponsorship at the highest levels. Volkov's voice resumed the briefing. "Extraction teams will be positioned at 4 locations around the conference center. Once communications are disrupted, we have approximately 25 minutes before backup systems are activated. The targets will be moved to secure locations for interrogation. Elena was recording everything on her own device, but Marcus could see her struggle to remain focused. Learning that her trusted handler was orchestrating the operation they had been assigned to prevent was devastating on multiple levels. A new voice joined the conversation, speaking with the crisp authority of someone accustomed to command. "What about the surveillance teams? Both CIA and DIA have been monitoring our preliminary activities." Morrison's response chilled Marcus to the bone. "Agent Vasquez has been providing regular reports that I've been sanitizing before passing them up the chain. Her surveillance has actually been useful for identifying security gaps we might have missed. As for the DIA operative, he's been conducting routine monitoring without realizing the scope of what he's observing." Elena's face showed a mixture of betrayal and rage that Marcus recognized from his own experience with operational betrayal, but her whispered response demonstrated the professionalism that had kept her alive through years of dangerous assignments. "We have enough," she said quietly. "Let's extract while we still can." Marcus began packing his equipment, but the conversation in the meeting room took an ominous turn. "There is one complication," Volkov said. "My people observed both surveillance operatives in the same location yesterday. They may be coordinating their activities." Morrison's voice carried a note of concern. "That wasn't anticipated. Vasquez is supposed to be operating independently. Perhaps it's time to eliminate potential complications," the American contractor suggested. "2 accidents would be easier to arrange than trying to manage their activities until tomorrow." Elena started to rise, but Marcus pulled her back down. Getting captured now would accomplish nothing except confirming their enemy's suspicions. They needed to escape with the intelligence they had gathered and find a way to prevent the attack. "Negative," Morrison replied. "Too many coincidental deaths would attract investigation. We proceed as planned, but increase monitoring of both operatives. If they interfere with tomorrow's operation, we deal with them during the extraction phase." The meeting began to break up, with participants receiving final assignments and communication protocols. Marcus and Elena had approximately 5 minutes to clear the building before the attendees began leaving. Their withdrawal was more challenging than the infiltration had been. Elena's emotional state made her movements less controlled, and Marcus had to guide her through the escape route while carrying both sets of surveillance equipment. They reached the alley exit just as the first participants left through the main entrance. Marcus pulled Elena into the shadows between 2 dumpsters, both of them breathing hard from the adrenaline and physical exertion. "We need to get somewhere safe and analyze what we recorded," Marcus whispered. Elena nodded, her professional training reasserting control over her emotional response. "My apartment is compromised. Morrison knows the location." "Do you have a secure location?" Marcus considered his options. His own apartment was probably safe, but it wasn't equipped for the kind of analysis they needed to perform. "I know a place." "It's not official, but it's secure." 20 minutes later, they were sitting in the back room of a small electronics repair shop in Queens. The owner, Tommy Chen, had worked with Marcus on several classified projects during his active service. Tommy asked no questions as he provided them with secure communication equipment and signal analysis tools. Elena connected her recording device to Tommy's computer system, and the conversation from the meeting played back with crystal clarity. The evidence was damning, not just of Morrison's betrayal, but of a sophisticated intelligence operation targeting American cybersecurity infrastructure. "We need to get this to someone who can authorize immediate action," Marcus said. "The attack is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Who can we trust?" Elena asked. "Morrison has been my primary contact for 3 years. He knows every aspect of my operational history, my methods, my contacts. For all we know, this entire operation was designed to identify other potential security risks." Marcus pulled out his secure phone and scrolled through his encrypted contact list. "Director Chen has been straight with me, but she might not have the authority to coordinate the kind of response we need. This requires multi-agency cooperation on very short notice." Elena was studying the surveillance photos she had taken during the meeting. "We have faces, voices, and detailed operational plans, but without official backing, we're just 2 rogue operatives with a story that implicates a senior CIA official." The weight of their situation settled over both of them. They had gathered intelligence that could prevent a significant attack on American security infrastructure, but the evidence implicated someone in a position to suppress their warnings. "There's one option," Marcus said finally. "It's dangerous and probably career-ending, but it might work." Elena looked up from the photographs. At this point, career concerns seem relatively minor. "What do you have in mind?" Marcus activated the secure communication system and began composing an encrypted message. "We bypass the normal chain of command entirely. I send this intelligence directly to the FBI's National Security Division and the Secret Service simultaneously. We include enough detail that they can't ignore the threat, even if they can't immediately verify our identities. That's essentially defection from our own agencies," Elena pointed out. "Only if we're wrong about Morrison. If we're right, it's the only way to prevent tomorrow's attack." Elena watched Marcus compose the message, her expression reflecting the same calculation he was making. They were gambling their careers and possibly their lives on the assumption that other parts of the government were still trustworthy. "Send it," she said finally. "David died trying to prevent this. We can't let his work be wasted because we were afraid to take risks." Marcus transmitted the message knowing there was no taking it back. Within hours, they would either be heroes who prevented a major attack or fugitives who had accused a senior intelligence official of treason. Either way, their quiet surveillance operation had just become something much more dangerous. The response came faster than Marcus had anticipated. At 4 a.m., his secure phone vibrated with an encrypted message from FBI Assistant Director Catherine Walsh. The message was brief but decisive. "Intelligence received and verified through independent sources. Federal response teams mobilizing. Report to 26 Federal Plaza at 0600 for operational briefing." Elena had been dozing in the chair next to his, but woke immediately when his phone chimed. The electronics shop had become their temporary command post, with Tommy Chen providing security while they monitored multiple communication channels. "FBI wants us at Federal Plaza in 2 hours, Marcus reported. "They're taking this seriously." Elena rubbed her eyes, looking older than her 38 years. The betrayal by Morrison had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, but her professional training kept her focused on the mission. "Any word from your handler?" Marcus checked his other communication devices. Nothing from Director Chen. Either she's not aware of what we've initiated, or she's been told to maintain radio silence until this sorts itself out. They spent the next hour reviewing their evidence and preparing for what would likely be an intense interrogation by federal agents who had no reason to trust two rogue intelligence operatives. Elena's recordings were comprehensive, but their methods of obtaining the intelligence had been completely unauthorized. Tommy drove them to Federal Plaza in his unmarked van, taking a circuitous route that allowed them to check for surveillance. The streets were nearly empty at 5:30 a.m., but Marcus noticed more law enforcement vehicles than usual for the early hour. The FBI building was buzzing with activity despite the time. Agents moved with the focused urgency that indicated a major operation in progress. Marcus and Elena were met at security by two agents who had obviously been briefed about their arrival. Assistant Director Walsh was waiting in a secure conference room on the 15th floor. She was a woman in her early 50s with graying hair and the kind of intense focus that came from 25 years of federal law enforcement. Also present were representatives from the Secret Service, NSA, and Department of Homeland Security. "Your intelligence has been independently corroborated," Walsh began without preamble. "We've been tracking components of this network for 8 months, but we didn't have the operational details you provided. Deputy Director Morrison is currently under surveillance, and we've identified most of the other participants in last night's meeting." Marcus felt a wave of relief that their gamble had paid off, but Elena's expression remained guarded. She had learned not to trust authority figures too quickly. "What's the status of today's conference?" Elena asked. "Postponed indefinitely," the Secret Service representative replied. "We're using the original schedule as cover while we position assets to intercept the attack teams. Instead of cybersecurity experts, they'll be walking into a carefully prepared trap." Walsh activated a wall display showing the conference center and surrounding area. Red markers indicated the positions of Volkov's extraction teams, while blue markers showed federal response units. "We have 47 minutes from the moment they activate their communication disruption to capture all participants before they Realize the operation has been compromised, Walsh explained. Your intelligence about the timing and extraction points makes this possible. Elena studied the tactical plan, her expression showing professional approval despite her emotional exhaustion. What about Morrison? He'll realize something is wrong when the conference doesn't proceed as scheduled. Morrison is about to receive a fabricated intelligence report suggesting that you've both been killed in a car accident, the NSA representative said. He'll believe the operation can proceed without interference from your surveillance. Marcus was impressed by the federal response's sophistication. In less than 4 hours, multiple agencies had coordinated a complex counterintelligence operation based on their unauthorized investigation. Where do we fit into this? Marcus asked. Walsh's expression became more serious. You're both officially dead as of 3 hours ago. Car accident on the Long Island Expressway. Both bodies too damaged for immediate identification. That gives us operational flexibility while protecting you from retaliation. Elena's eyes widened. How long do we stay dead? Until we roll up the entire network and identify all of Morrison's contacts. Your partner David Kim was killed because someone leaked his identity to hostile operatives. We're not making that mistake again. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of final preparations and real-time monitoring. Marcus and Elena were positioned in a mobile command unit with direct visual contact to the conference center, watching as Volkov's teams moved into position exactly as their intelligence had predicted. At 8:15 a.m., the communication disruption began precisely on schedule. Cellular towers went offline in a carefully controlled pattern, and internet connectivity disappeared across 12 blocks of Manhattan. To Volkov's team, everything was proceeding perfectly. The extraction teams moved toward the conference center, expecting to find chaos and confusion. Instead, they encountered federal agents who had been waiting in position for hours. The arrests were swift and coordinated, with each team neutralized before they could communicate with the others. Morrison's arrest was handled separately. Elena watched through encrypted video feed as FBI agents entered his office at CIA headquarters in Langley. His face showed complete shock when they presented evidence of his coordination with foreign operatives. He actually believed he was going to get away with it, Elena said quietly. Marcus nodded, remembering the confidence in Morrison's voice during the warehouse meeting. 25 years of successful operations probably made him think he was smarter than everyone else. By noon, the immediate threat had been neutralized. Volkov and his associates were in federal custody. The communication disruption equipment had been confiscated, and Morrison was facing charges of treason and conspiracy. But the investigation was just beginning. Elena's debrief took place in a secure facility in Virginia, with investigators from multiple agencies asking detailed questions about her 3-year relationship with Morrison. Every operation she had conducted under his supervision would need to be reviewed for potential compromise. Your partner, David Kim, wasn't the only casualty of Morrison's activity.